The comeback kid. Why do you say that, Dan?
I mean, go back 18 months. I mean, as you know well, back was against the wall. And now you look at growth, look at profitability and cash flow, especially as little brother Lyft is at the kids' table. I mean, they're gaining share. And I think this is just a knee-jerk reaction where we're buyers. I think this is a stock that continues to move higher. An inflection point quarter, Rocky Balboa-like comeback for Uber.
The gross bookings forecast for the current period was slightly ahead of expectations. But there does seem to be a growth concern longer term with Uber. Why don't you share that concern?
Look, they've been able to balance. And strategically, if you look at rides, you look at mobility, you look at what's happening ultimately on the food delivery business, I think actually numbers continue to be conservative. And I think the key here is that the street doesn't get ahead of itself. They're not going to continue to raise guidance, maybe as dramatically as some of the investors thought, which is why you're seeing a knee-jerk reaction here. But I think that's the game for them. Under-promise, over-deliver, balanced growth going into 2024. And I think it's one of the best risk-reward disruptive tech names out there with this comeback story being led by Dara.
You go back to February, and that guidance you're referring to is adjusted EBITDA of $5 billion in 2024. Even if not dramatic, were you surprised they didn't revise higher even a little?
I think that's the right poker move. I mean, in this macro, still some volatility going the second half of the year. Want to give themselves wiggle room. I still think that that's beatable. But if you look at the execution story, not just talking the talk, walking the walk, and I think many of the bears that have been skeptical have been proven wrong. If you look at the last few quarters, and even you go back last year, I think this is really now what I'll call a next chapter of success for Uber that's starting to play out.
Long term, what is the picture for Uber? You know, you called Dara Khosrowshahi the comeback kid, but that comeback's happened. You know, how does he lead this company into the next 5 or 10 years?
I think ultimately down the road, it's going to be autonomous is going to play a role. You know, where I do see them potentially doing more and more things with Tesla. You know, just when you think about from a, you know, where that ultimately is going from a technology perspective, I think freight is going to be something where they're going to add more into from a resource perspective, and then ultimately just penetrating the consumer more and more. I think that's really going to be the goal. That's the golden goose for Uber when you think about where they're heading.
I think Dara Khosrowshahi was saying earlier this morning that they see a world of true autonomy being 7 to 10 years away. Does that signal any complacency to you, that they're not investing and focused on it now?
Again, what they say and what they're actually doing are two separate things. I do think strategically they are going to be focused on it, but I think it's going to be more through partnerships. Because the last thing you want to see them do is just spend money like 1980s rock stars like they were doing 2-3 years ago. I think it's about balanced growth here. That continues to sort of play out. It's hard to poke holes in the story. You have knee-jerk reactions here, just like we've seen with some other names, but we're buyers here. I think this is a stock that ultimately gets into the senior citizen type level as we go in 2024.
Yeah, Dan, we've been talking a lot here on Bloomberg Technology about the idea of an everything app. And Uber seems like as close to an everything app as you see in Southeast Asia, for example. Do you see a future for them where they offer a broader range of services and products?
Look, I think that's definitely one of the potential paths. But as we've seen, you know, with Grab in Indonesia and throughout Asia, we've seen it with WeChat. It's easier said than done. And I do think Uber right now, that is maybe a broader plan. Of course, that it's a plan for Twitter, formerly and now known as X, in terms of Musk's overall strategy. But Uber needs to make sure that they build this out the right way and don't just try to be all things to all people. And I think that's right now the balance that Dara's striking. But finally, adults in the room running the company, and investors like what they see this year.
Dan, looking ahead to Thursday, the big one, Apple reports its earnings. What are you expecting from the iPhone maker?
get out the popcorn. I mean, they continue to I think beat expectations in China, which is the hearts and lungs. This is the drum roll, as Gurman talks about, the iPhone 15. I think the stock that continues to re-rate higher in services as it marches toward that 3.5, 4 trillion mark, despite many yelling fire in a crowded theater this year.
I look at MODL on the Bloomberg terminal, the estimates that we're compiling, and the only area of sort of year-on-year top-line growth is services. Where's your head at with Apple's services offering right now?
I think services starts to now uptick toward double digits as we go into fiscal 24. I think some of the parts, that's worth 1.3 to 1.4 trillion. And this is all the drum roll to a re-accelerating growth story despite the macro. And that's what's happening at Apple. You know, I think when you think about it, it's also the margin story. You're seeing ASPs lift. It's another example of Cook playing chess while others play checkers.